Hello, welcome to SchoolsNet Kenya e-learning platform. My name is Teacher James and I'll be teaching you science, class 7 and class 8. Welcome. So today we are going to revise on class 8 work, topic name plants. Welcome. And before we take our revision, we want to have one question that will guide us on how to answer questions related to plants. So welcome. Here we have an example of a question taken from one of the KCPE papers, and we are going to read together. The following are some characteristics of plants. Characteristic number 1, thin cuticle, silver or silvery hair, flexible stem, more stomata on the lower surface of the leaf, then air sacs. And the question reads, which pair of characteristics is for plants adapted to wet areas? I read again. Which pair of characteristics is for plants adapted to wet areas? Now pupils, for you to tackle such a question, you have first of all to familiarize yourself with the classification or the adaptation of plants. So I'm going to take you through adaptation of plants, and we are going to see how we are able to answer this question without difficulties. So plants have some adaptations that make them either grow in normal soil and water condition, or some may survive in areas where maybe there is limited rainfall or there is much rain. So we are going to see how adaptations or mechanisms. Adaptation, if we define the word adaptation, are mechanisms. Mechanisms that a plant may use to survive in extreme weather conditions. So we have two extreme weather conditions, that is dry areas. Plants to survive in dry areas, they need to have some mechanisms that will enable them to survive in those harsh conditions. So we have dry areas and wet areas, and we are going to compare the two and see how they are able to survive in both areas. Dry areas, we have plants that we refer to as xerophytes. Xerophytes are plants that have mechanism that will make them conserve or store water for future use. So if they lose a lot of water, they may end up drying, and that is why most of the plants cannot survive in dry areas, because maybe they lose a lot of water or they do not have mechanism that will make them store water for future use or for use when there is no rainfall or minimal rainfall. Then we have the other part that we are going to discuss today about plants that are adapted to survive in wet areas. These plants are known as hydrophytes, from the word hydro, water, hydrophytes. Hydrophytes will be adapted to lose a lot of water to accommodate the incoming water, because they are already in an area, growing in an area whereby they have enough supply of water, or sometimes they are even growing in water. Have you ever watched a video whereby you discover that in the sea or in the ocean, there are some plants growing inside? How do you think they survive? They survive because they have some mechanisms that will make them grow or survive in wet areas. So let us pick on one plant, then we see how it is adapted to surviving in wet areas or dry areas. We start with xerophytes. Xerophytes, as I have told you, Lana, they are plants that will survive in dry areas. Now, what are the adaptations that will make them conserve water or maybe reduce the loss of water? How do plants lose water? Through transpiration. And transpiration occurs through small holes in the leaves called stomata. So let's see the mechanism under which these plants will be able to conserve or to minimize the loss of water to the atmosphere. Number one, these plants will have thin, very thin or needle-like leaves. That way, they are able to minimize the surface area exposed to the air. That way, they will be able to minimize the loss of water to the atmosphere. Meaning, if they had broad leaves, very big leaves, then that surface is already exposed to the air, and transpiration may take place very fast, meaning that this plant will not be able to survive in dry areas. Number two, they do have waxy leaves, meaning that if that wax is covering the leaf, the surface of the leaf, it means that it will not allow water to go outside the leaf unless just a little amount of water will be lost. So wax, as you know, does not mix with water. So, and when you cover a leaf with wax, it means that water will not be lost easily. Then, some plants will lose, sometimes they lose leaves. They shed their leaves. We refer to them as deciduous plants. They lose leaves during dry areas or dry seasons. So some plants may lose or drop their leaves. If they drop their leaves, it means that not much water will be lost because they do not have leaves. And as you know, stomata is most likely located at the surface of the leaf. Meaning if the plant loses most of the leaves, it means it will not lose water. So it will be there surviving and waiting for the rains to come. Then it will produce its leaves. Then another way of these plants, xerophytes, adapting themselves into surviving in dry areas is by folding their leaves. So if they fold their leaves to make sure that they trap air inside the leaf. That way, they minimize the amount of water evaporating from the plant or from the leaf through transpiration. So folding their leaves is a mechanism that will help them conserve water. The other number 5, plants will also be able to have tiny stomatas. Tiny, very little, microscopic, meaning that if they reduce the size of the hole that water is coming out through, then limited water will go out. That is why they have tiny stomata. And most of the time, you'll find that the tiny stomata will be located at the lower surface of the leaf. Because if it is exposed to the sun and exposed to the air on the upper part of the leaf, it means that that one will accelerate the rate of water loss to the atmosphere. But most of the leaves will have tiny stomatas that are few in number and located at the lower part of the leaf. Meaning, if they are located at the lower part of the leaf, they will reduce even the rate of transpiration because the leaf is not exposed to the sun. The other way of this plant ensuring that it has enough water to survive throughout the time that it will be very dry is making sure that it has few leaves. If a plant has several leaves, it loses a lot of water. If it reduces the amount of leaves, then it saves water. Then, some plants will only have needles, leaves that look like needles. And because photosynthesis must take place, it means that they have to facilitate the photosynthesis through the stem. So you will find that some stems will be green, replacing the leaves, to make sure that photosynthesis will take place and the plants will not lose water through the leaves. So some plants like cactus will have some part of that stem green to facilitate photosynthesis. Then other plants like cactus and aloe vera will have succulent stem. That stem is able to accommodate water for some time, making sure that if there is a duration where the plant did not get water from the rain, then it will have enough water to survive until rain comes back. Now let's take an example of plants that will be able to survive in dry areas. One is jacaranda. Have you seen a jacaranda tree? Then we have sisal. Maybe that one is very common. Then we have cactus, and we have acacia, among other plants. Now, let us now go back to another type of plant that will survive in wet areas. Do you remember what I told you the name of that plant is? They are called hydrophytes. Hydro means water. Hydrophytes. These plants are adapted to losing a lot of water. The other plant we discussed earlier, xerophytes, they will save water because they are already growing in a dry area. These plants are already growing in areas whereby they have plenty of water. So, for them to survive under this condition of a lot of water supply, they have now to have a mechanism that will enable them to lose a lot of water at a very high rate, meaning that they do not have a lot of water that may make the plant not even to grow. So, mechanism number one, on dry areas, we say that they have to make sure that they have needle-like leaves, tiny leaves, as tiny as they can, to reduce the loss of water. In this scenario, this plant will have broad, big one, broad leaves. Broad leaves, meaning that it has a lot of surface that is exposed to the environment or to the atmosphere, meaning that the loss of water from this plant will be very high. It will lose water at a very high rate, meaning that it will be able now to survive in wet areas. Another mechanism is having large stomatas. Large stomata that is located at the upper surface of the leaf, meaning that this leaf will now be exposed to the sun and to the air. That way, it will facilitate or it will accelerate the rate of transpiration. So, majorly, we have discovered that in the 2 points, we are all talking about losing of water at a very high speed. So, when you answer any questions that maybe will come in your exam, you must ask yourself, if a plant is already growing in water or near water bodies or where there is plenty of water, it means that it will have to accelerate the loss of water. The other one that survives in dry areas, it has to make sure that it conserves water, because sometimes there are prolonged periods of dry period that do not even experience rain. So, number 3, this kind of plant has to make sure that it has many leaves. These many leaves will have many stomatas. That way, the rate of transpiration will be very high. That way, it will make sure that it survives under this wet condition. Some will have spongy stems. These spongy stems means that they are able to trap air inside the stem, making them float on water. An example, a very good example, is water hyacinth. It is able to grow even on top or in water or on water. Because the stem is somehow spongy, it is able to accommodate space for air, making the plant float on water. Some will have flexible stem. When it is very flexible, it is able to move. When water currents flows near the plant or across the plant, it is able to bend and come back without breaking. That is why they need stems that are very flexible, so that they are not broken by water when water is running. Another adaptation is that they have to have waxy leaves. So if a plant has waxy leaves, it means that water will not be able to settle on the leaves when water splashes from water bodies, because some of the plants will grow even in water, then it means that the water will not be able to settle on the leaves. That way, they will be able to survive in wet areas. Another way of these plants surviving in wet areas is having shallow, extended roots. So the roots of the plant will not go very deep into the soil. They will just be shallow. Not like in dry areas, whereby the roots of that plant have to go very deep into the soil to look for water. In this scenario, they only need limited supply of water because they are already growing in areas where there is enough water. Then, some plants which grow on wet areas, sometimes they are already in water. So, to facilitate breathing, they develop roots, which we can refer to as breathing roots. And a good example of this plant is mangrove plant. It develops roots that will now be able to facilitate gaseous exchange for the plant. Now let's go back to our question and we try and tackle using the methods that we have seen, that in wet areas the plant will lose a lot of water. In dry areas it will need to conserve water. Now the question reads again, which pair of characteristics is for plants adapted to wet areas? We have seen that thin cuticle will help plants to lose a lot of water, meaning that that plant will be able to survive in wet areas. So number 1 is correct for wet areas. Number 2, silvery hairs. We said that this one will reflect the sunlight rays, reducing the rate of transpiration. So this one is for dry areas. Then flexible stems, meaning that the plant is growing in wet areas and it is reducing the capability of water to break the stem. Then, so we pick number 1 and we pick number 2, then we go to number 3, more stomata on the lower surface of the leaf, meaning that it will lose less or limited amount of water through transpiration. So this one is for dry areas. Then air sacs, it means that the water, the stem is able to trap air into the stem, meaning that it will be able to float on water. So number 1, number 3, and number 4 are the correct answers. Now we go to the answers that we are given here and we see which one matches our correct answers. Number 1, it talks about silvery hair, which is wrong, and number 4, air sacs, which is correct. So answer number 1 is wrong. Number 2, it talks about thin cuticle, which is correct, and air sacs, which is correct. Number 3, it has number C. Answer number C is having flexible stem and more stomata on the lower surface of the leaf, meaning that answer number C is wrong because it has plants that will survive in dry areas. Then D, it has thin cuticle and more stomata located on the lower surface of the leaf. So pupil or student, you are able now to answer this question comparing the adaptation by which a plant is able to survive in areas that are dry or areas that are wet. So to make this one very clear to you, make sure that when you are tackling a question like this, make sure that you consider plants that grow in dry areas to have a mechanism that will be able to enable them to store water or to reduce the amount of water loss. Plants growing in wet areas, make sure that you consider the mechanism that may make the plant be able to lose water through transpiration at a very high rate. So the answer for our question is B, whereby the plant has thin cuticles and it also have air sacs to enable the plant float on water. Until we meet again, Teacher James.